There's just no evidence that any of the founding fathers, even if they were Christian, which some of them were, which I'll point out, some of them were, they did not intend America to be a Christian national country, Christian nationalist country. Like, for example, Holy Roman Empire, which was before Germany. It's modern day Germany. They call themselves the Holy Roman Empire. Italy, Church of England in England. The world order before the end of the 18th century was Christian nationalism in many senses.
Yeah. Now, didn't Thomas Paine, I was reading his book, so before he started going into like digging in on the Bible, he was supportive of basically Christian morals, right? He was saying that the laws of man or the laws of a nation should be guided by the laws of God.
Yes.
And not by
a lot of people say that these founding fathers were mostly deist in the sense that they just sort of attribute a mind to the universe itself and just kind of go off there and have reason before dogma. The reason is your guiding light. A lot of the founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson was one. Thomas Paine too, even though Thomas Paine was so critical of Christianity, as you know, you were reading Age of Reason. He's just trying to debunk the Bible left and right. But then he'll say things like, but the real Jesus probably taught this, probably was a philosopher, probably was a good dude. You see this with Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson wrote a text called the Syllabus. And this syllabus was basically he's taking scissors to the Bible, cutting off the whole Old Testament, gone. He doesn't need that no more. All right, New Testament, what do we got? Oh, all the epistles and all that stuff, Revelation, gone. All right, what do we got left? We got 4 Gospels left. Okay, what do we got? Chopping off everything except for the red letters, which is, I say red letters because modern Bibles put Jesus' quotes in red in some modern Bibles. So I'm just saying, I'm not saying he had a Bible with red letters, but I'm saying he chops off only the quotes from Jesus himself. So all he has left is sayings from Jesus. He's got no crucifixion scene.
Who are we talking about? Who are we
Thomas
talking about?
Jefferson.
Jefferson did this.
And
okay.
Some people call it the Jefferson Bible. He called it a syllabus for whatever reason. And what he's left with is he's left with basically a list of sayings of Jesus and his philosophies. And he thought that Jesus himself was a swell dude, someone to follow, someone who challenged the status quo, someone who thought with reason. And in many ways, he's right. In many ways. So, for example, one of the Torah laws is on a Sabbath, if your animal falls into a ditch, you cannot go and get that animal out of the ditch. It's going to stay in that ditch until the next day. And hopefully it doesn't die.
Right.
Because you can't work on the Sabbath. And Jesus says, come on. You're not going to go and get we can get our animals on the Sabbath. That's not, God gave the Sabbath to man. So he's basically saying like, we can do things on the Sabbath. He picks grain on the Sabbath and gives it to his disciples. Apparently David did the same thing in one of the books from Kings and Chronicles. Yeah. So Jesus is sort of like a philosopher going against the grain, putting reason ahead of everything else. Yeah. And that's Thomas Jefferson's view of Jesus. Yeah. And Thomas Paine was a little more critical of Christianity in general. Another thing Thomas Paine says, I'm sorry, let me go back to Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson, and just to cap off what he thought about Jesus, he said Jesus was a swell dude. Christianity I'm the only real Christian. Jefferson says this. But that's not a good thing for Christians. Christians can't really claim this, and I'll tell you why. Okay. He says the Trinity is incoherent. He says, how can one be the same as another and then the same as another? That's 3. That's polytheism. He says that's nonsense. He says the church is Platonism. He says the church is just pure Platonism. Here, let me pull up a letter from him where he writes this so I can give you the exact quote.
The church is Platonism.
Yeah, he says this.
Is he talking about like a noble lie?
Yeah. So in 1823, on April 11th, Jefferson wrote to John Adams. He says, the truth is that the greatest enemies to the doctrines of Jesus are those calling themselves Christians, the expositors of them, who have perverted them for the structure of a system of fancy absolutely incomprehensible and without any foundation in his genuine words. And the day will come when the mystical generation of Jesus, by the Supreme Being, his Father, in the womb of a virgin, will be classed with the fable of the generation of Minerva, the goddess Minerva. Basically saying the day will come when people will realize that the stories about Jesus being the Son of God will be a fable, just like we talk about the fable of Minerva. He called it a fable. Okay? And then he says, but we hope that the dawn of reason and freedom of thought in these United States will do away with all this artificial scaffolding and restore to us the primitive and genuine doctrines of this most venerated reformer of human errors. So he's saying the historical Jesus is someone that's great who lived with reason and followed. The Bible and the myths about Jesus are garbage. They're fables. We don't need them. So it's very distinct. It's not modern day Christianity. He's like a Gnostic heretic. He's a heretic. There's no way around that. There's not a single Christian or Catholic or Orthodox that would claim that and say, I believe that. None of them. It's just heresy. One more thing I want to point out. He says about the Platonism thing.
Yeah, one of the things that really stuck out to me about Thomas Paine's Age of Reason, where he's talking about Christianity being I think he calls it a pious fraud. And he said the thing about it is it gets lost in translation from the first Christian preachers who started talking about it to the second generation of Christian preachers that started talking about it, all the way down to the third generation of Christian preachers that were talking about it, until eventually it gets so far down the line, they forget that it was a fraud in the first place.
Right.
Especially when you have people making a livelihood by preaching it.
Yeah, and then by the 4th century, Council of Nicaea comes along, and they're holding these ecumenical councils into saying, we believe this, and this is doctrine now. Well, why didn't Jesus say that? Why didn't Jesus say that I am part of a Trinity, and if you don't believe in this Trinity, you're not a Christian? He never says that. In fact, he tells people to get to heaven, be good, treat your neighbors good. That's all he says.
Right.
He doesn't say he doesn't even say, but you have to believe I resurrected.
When did the Council of Nicaea happen?
325.
325.
Yeah.
And so what was the purpose of it?
We're talking 300 years after Jesus is dead.
Right.
The purpose was to say that in order to be a member of the Church of Christianity, the Orthodox Catholic Church, you have to believe in a Trinity, that God and the Father and the Holy Spirit are all one.
They're all one.
So before that wasn't exactly doctrine. So Jesus himself didn't really preach that, and Thomas Jefferson is pointing this out, that this church has been corrupted by Platonism, which is what Nietzsche also agrees with. Now, in 1816, on January 9th, he wrote a letter to Charles Thomson, and he's talking about this syllabus that he wrote. And he says, I too have made a wee little book from the same materials, which I call the philosophy of Jesus. It is a paradigm of his doctrines made by cutting the text out of the book and arranging them on pages of a blank book in order, a more beautiful or precious morsel of ethics I have ever seen. It is a document in proof that I am a real Christian, that is to say, a disciple of the doctrines of Jesus, very different from the Platonists who will call me an infidel. He's saying the church are a bunch of Platonists. They're not Christians. This is all philosophy, and they're not actually following reason. Jesus, he thinks, in his opinion, Jesus followed reason. Now, me personally, I think he's going too far. Why? I think you don't even need Jesus. Just follow reason, which is what Thomas Paine was doing. Thomas Paine was just like, reason. That's it. That's your logos. And so, but I guess I could see what Thomas Jefferson was doing when 90% of your population are Christians. You kind of have to play the game.
Right.
So you really don't have a choice there. But so.